All right, how you feeling? You feeling like excited?
Sure. I wish I had seen one of your whole episodes, not just like some of the teasers.
Oh, it's okay. The teasers are what the teasers are what get the actual numbers going instead of the full episodes. We're back for episode 10 of Yeah For Real, a super duper exciting episode. We've made it to 10 episodes, and I could think of no better guest to have on than Mr. Man over here. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Timon Malloy, I've known Isaac for I don't know, 3 or 4 years now, and have always enjoyed our conversation.
Oh yeah, conversations which I will never forget. Wherever me and Timon are, we'll get into some sort of conversations about politics or some world event uh, to the delight of everyone around us. Um, and so, as all avid Yeah For Real listeners know, I don't bring the topics. Guest brings the topic, and so I'm just super curious. What are we going to talk about today?
Well, um, I'm very involved in work and the as an environmentalist and on the issue of climate change. And I thought we could talk about climate change and maybe green building or energy use in buildings and stuff. And feel free to jump in with questions, at any time, or I certainly hope. But we just had Climate Week here in New York, like a couple of weeks ago. And, I was talking with a lot of my environmentalist buddies, and I was telling one, I actually was worked a lot. I do volunteer work with my family foundation and with some other philanthropists. And, I've actually I worked a lot on climate change, like in as an issue in like the 80s and 90s, when the real goal was just to like get people's attention that like we knew. I mean, they actually, it's people have been writing about climate change since like the 1830s,
Yeah.
and saying like in those days was like coal. They're like, we're burning all the coal and like the emissions are bad for the environment, and they knew that that would eventually lead to climate change. So it's not, it's been known about for a long time, but people really weren't that aware of it. So in the 80s and 90s, we were doing things to try and just bring this awareness of this, as an issue, as something that, and of course, at the time, if people had really started working on this, it could have been pretty much prevented, you know. And of course, and then what happened is uh in the late 90s, so in the 80s and 90s, the environment was not really a partisan issue. I mean, things like the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act would pass with like 98% of bipartisan support. And so in the late 90s, it became politicized, and there
Hmm.
became massive lobbying efforts and disinformation efforts by basically like Exxon, Saudis, and other people who basically make, I mean, like the Saudis have basically an unlimited amount of money from
Yeah.
oil, and just so much money and such a strong economic interest in just continuing to pollute like this. And, you know, but I think it's still, so I think most young people, are fairly familiar with it, but I feel like overall, it's just shocking that, I mean, like in this election, on this issue, there is such a clear-cut divide. I mean, Biden and the Democrats have passed this, Inflation Reduction Act is like the biggest government program to fight climate change ever. And, which Kamala will carry on a similar approach of trying to solve this
Hmm.
problem. And the Republicans, the MAGA, are like drill baby drill, drill
Yeah.
baby drill. And meanwhile, what's really happened is that, notwithstanding people talking about it a lot and having a lot of electric cars and everything, we really have basically achieved almost nothing to fight this problem. I mean, carbon dioxide emissions are more than ever. They haven't not stayed, the rate of growth has not only not declined, it's continued to be high or even accelerated. And meanwhile, we've already emitted so much CO2 that continued warming is guaranteed to go on for at least like 20 years. So, um, you know, and then I have I have some notes here. I just thought I would
Yeah.
share this. This was from a webinar called Climate Change in the American Mind. And this was lectured by the head of a program at Yale on climate change communications, which they've been studying, and they did these surveys. So they found out there's six groups of Americans, you know, that in their survey, they've divided the population into like six groups based on their attitudes on climate change.
Okay.
So the first group is they call the alarmed, and it's about 27% of the people. And these are people who view climate change as one of the top political issues. They're aware how bad it is, and they're very alarmed about it. And then the next group is they call the concerned, and this is also like 27%. And these ones, they believe in climate change. They think it's real, but they think the impact is something that will happen in the future someday.
Okay.
And then the next group they call the cautious, which is about 16%. So the alarmed and the concerned is more than 50% overall right there. But then the next group are like the cautious, and these are people who are confused. Like they're aware that a lot of people are worried about climate change. They think there are questions about it. They don't know if it's really real, or if it's real, is it really going to happen, or is it going to affect me or whatever. Then the next group they call the disengaged. This is about 7%, and they're like these are just people who don't know anything about climate change.
Yeah.
They don't really know of it as an issue, or they're disengaged. Maybe they're disengaged from the news in general. The next 11% are the doubtful. These are people, they could be MAGA or something. This is a lie. It's not happening. And
Hmm.
they don't believe in it. And then the final group they call the dismissive. And these are people who actively believe that climate change is like a hoax, it's a conspiracy. They're against doing anything about it. These are the people who drive around giant pickup trucks and, harassing people with electric cars. And
And what's
they're
the
like, these
percentage on that one?
people, huh?
What's the percentage on that
11.
one?
They call that 11. And, and they're not that many of them, I mean, they're 11%, there are many of them, but they're, relatively few, but they're like really loud and kind
Yeah.
of in your face about it. And then the other thing, I didn't make the notes this one, but they also analyze this by like political persuasion. And they're pretty much, among progressives and Democrats, view this as one of the top, like they had a ranking of the 20 most concerning issues. And most Democrats or progressive people would have, the economy, climate change, are some of the top issues. They're like Republicans basically, it's like 20 out of 20. I mean, it's not, you
Yeah.
know. And the thing to me is, meanwhile, it's just like I say, it's just more and more CO2 than ever. And we're seeing, it's here. We're just seeing it. Like, look at these massive hurricanes. Um,
Yeah. Three in a row.
and they're like the 100-year storm is coming now about like every 5 to 10 years. This one they just had, they called it the 1,000-year storm.
Yeah.
And the CO2 is at a level far above anything in millennia. Um, and leading climate, I mean, the whole campaign has been try to limit it to 1.5 degrees Celsius of like global warming.
Yeah.
We're there now. There's no way we're achieving that. 2 degrees would be if you immediately shut down every coal plant and, declared, a climate crisis like we're really in, you still really wouldn't be able to achieve two. So we're looking at a world where, you know, by like the end of the century, you're going to be looking at like 3 degrees Celsius of global warming,
Yeah.
which I just don't think people realize how devastating this will be. I mean, you're going to see, you know, massive flooding. The sea level is going to rise significantly. Most of the ice and glaciers will melt. And, meanwhile, um, combined with other environmental problems, I mean, you're going to have billions of climate refugees, massive extinction of species. I think you're seeing a collapse of natural ecosystems that we
Yeah.
rely on to support human life. So I've been going on and on here.
No, I'm so glad. I mean, there was so much good in what you just to piggyback off of what you said. Like people, I think only understand. Oh, I think most people probably only understand climate change and like the way it directly affects them. And I think you're right that people don't understand like what 3 degrees doesn't sound like a lot, but like 3 degrees is the difference between like the Great Barrier Reef existing or not existing. And like, and then it's like, oh, okay, whatever. So like the fish don't have their reef, but then that means that the fish die out. And that means that, fine, be a little personal. Like we don't get fish, like fish population's gone. I think I saw something that said that like an article a few days ago that 70% of all wildlife on the earth is gone. I mean,
Oh yeah,
hundreds, thousands of species that will just never be back. Um, and the refugees thing is like, I mean, I think that's already happening. I mean, like, every,
absolutely.
I mean, there's a reason that like, we were talking about this before we started the episode, but like, immigration is is the top issue in America, and it's the top issue here in the EU. And it's only going to get worse. I mean, there's only going to be more refugees as time goes on. Not to make things sound even worse than what you already said, but every single year in the last 3 years has been the hottest year on record. This past summer, hottest summer ever recorded since 1850. Um, Earth's temperature has risen an average of zero point 0.11 Fahrenheit per decade since 1850. So we're already 2 degrees above where we were in 1850, which is when we first started around, burning coal, the Industrial Revolution, that kind of thing. And so you're absolutely right that it's like a huge problem. And those numbers that you gave, 11% dismissive, 11% doubtful, 7% disengaged, like it's pretty incredible. I mean, it's pretty incredible how that's a lot of people. I mean, it's not a majority. It seems as though a majority of US citizens, believe in climate change and believe it's an issue, but it seems to be at the forefront of not most people's minds.
Well, and the thing is that, when they do a survey of the population at large, I mean, I think something like 80 to 85% of people would support strong laws to deal with climate change or anything. You have, basically almost every Republican congressman, for example, are climate deniers. And, it was confirmed to me by an expert recently that, basically they're all just lying. They all know that climate change is real.
Yeah.
They're taking money from Exxon, from Russia, from the Saudis, and, they can take dark money now, and, they're all, it is like a conspiracy, I
Yeah.
mean, they're
It's
all,
an actual conspiracy theory.
yeah, or it's like an oligarchy, and, they use the same PR machine that maintained that smoking was not bad for you, for like 50 years,
Yeah.
and, so, um, and the thing is that I believe that we could completely turn this around using technology that we have, you know, using I mean, I'm such an environmentalist. I completely, I think we need to reinvent everything to be sustainable, and not only the climate, but, so many things we're doing.
Hmm.
And so the thing I want to talk about a little bit more though is with the like green building.
Yeah, so I
And
was about to ask you, you're talking about reinventing. So like start from the beginning, like what and feel free if green building is the big thing. I mean, I'll say that I know a little bit about this because I took a New York City architecture and urbanism class at Wesleyan. And so I know a little bit about like, the LEED building standards, which is definitely something we should talk about. But yeah, I mean, talk to me here.
well, as I think I'm a professional commercial real estate developer or professional. And so it's interesting, like something like, you know, probably like at least a third of energy and like carbon emissions are related to buildings,
Hmm.
directly or indirectly. So, I mean, some of it is just from the building of buildings, and they use, the materials put into buildings. But, basically, if you think about it, like, I mean, I think in America there's something like 100 million buildings. And, something like 98% of them are that most of them are using most of their energy for heating. If you have like office buildings and things, also use a lot for air conditioning. But basically, most of them are, using most of their energy for heating, and which is basically oil or gas. Like it's mostly some propane, but mostly either natural gas or oil. And so what we're really saying here is that like, you have like 100 million buildings, each one of which is pumping CO2 out the roof, all the time, or certainly all the winter. Um, and, mostly very inefficient. I mean, this is like a huge problem because, when they build new buildings, so one thing I'll just tell you about, you may not never have heard of is what they see like LEED. Let me talk about LEED for a second. So
Yeah.
LEED stands for Leadership in Environmental and Energy Design. Um, and my family foundation actually helped fund the Green Building Council to come out with the original LEED back again in like the late 80s. Now there's many variations of the LEED code. Um, and LEED is kind of interesting because LEED is not only talking about the energy use, but also about many other things, like how healthy the indoor environment is in the building, or other aspects of like how buildings maybe pollute or recycle or do other things. And there are other codes that look at energy use more. Um, but one I want to mention that's been getting more attention in America, but it's fairly common in Northern Europe,
Hmm.
is a thing called passive house.
Yeah.
Have you heard of that? You've heard of
Yeah,
that?
I know all about the passive house, but for those who don't, do you want to explain what it is?
Well, passive house is a set of design principles that I think were mainly developed in like Germany and Northern Europe over, I don't know, the last 30 or 40 years. They now have a variation of passive house in America. Um, and basically it's kind of it's the most um, strictest energy use standard for buildings. And the original version was really intended for like houses. And some of the things you have are, first of all, that the entire house, first of all, should be very airtight and very well sealed up. And that in the construction, you then have a, high degree of insulation, which is partly, it's not just about the amount of insulation, but what Pacifier says is you have to design it so that the insulation layer completely envelops the structure without interruptions. So there are no holes, or sometimes people have, there are like often gaps or holes,
Yeah.
you know. Um, so Leeds says you should be able to look at the blueprints, and be able to draw a line all the way around where the insulation is continuous and, closed up. And then and in terms of sealing up the house, they actually pressurize the house with a blower system to test that it is in fact very tight. And in fact, they make the house so tight that one of the other things you need is actually mechanical ventilation.
Yeah.
So, because your traditional houses are just really not tight. They're maybe not insulated or very little, and they're not tight. And so in passive house, you're going to make it very airtight, and then you have to have mechanical ventilation. So actually, people find that in these houses, they actually have more fresh air than in a normal house because it has engineered ventilation. Um, and then they typically use like triple glazed windows and doors and windows that seal up very tight. And that's pretty much what passive house is about. But they compare to, a house built to this level of, insulation and tightness, like a typical modest size house, you could heat in the winter with a furnace about the size of like 1,000-watt hair dryer.
Yeah.
And that would be
Because of
enough.
how airtight it is. Yeah. So like
And then you
to
often
put
have
it.
a heat exchanger where you're
Yeah.
ventilating the exhaust air to warm the incoming air.
Yeah.
So, and now they're like in New York, I know architects building whole apartment buildings like this. And actually, and then they have like heat pump, heating and air conditioning systems. The problem they have is actually getting heat pump units small enough to function well at the very low amount they need. But so we're now looking at something like a third to half of the emissions and energy use, being used by buildings. And meanwhile, so if you have like a passive house, new construction, and you put like, solar cells on the roof, you could have a net zero house. I mean, you could actually have a house. Like I have a friend in New Hampshire who has I wouldn't say it's exactly passive house, but he's basically renovated it, very, very well insulated, similar to that. And he has just a nice solar installation on the roof.
Yeah.
He gets all the electricity he uses at his house, enough to charge his two electric cars that he and his wife drive around all the time, and sell the maximum amount of power into the grid that you're allowed to sell into the grid in New Hampshire, just with the panels on his roof.
Yeah.
And these panels are cheaper than ever, they're more efficient than ever.
Yeah, and
Um,
they pay themselves back, for
yeah.
you put a large. Well, so the problem, with solar panels and clean energy for the longest time was that it was too expensive, was that, it was never worth it for big companies to transition. Except now, as battery technology, the big problem has always been battery technology, right? Like storing solar, transporting it. But battery technology gets better every year, and so solar panels and wind are the cheapest forms of electricity these days.
Oh, by far.
Yeah,
Well, see, the battery technology, you're right. Like for traditional, one of the fun memes about this, they were like, energy efficiency and solar things are not just for like old hippies anymore.
yeah,
Like, I mean, all kinds of people like them. But you're right. And in the old days, it would be like the batteries would be a killer, like if you were trying to go off the grid. But like my friend is not off the grid. He doesn't even have batteries. But a lot of people do couple the batteries go very well with solar now. And if you want to have, I mean, like his thing, he's selling power into the grid, probably mostly during the day when he's not even necessarily home. And then at night, there's no solar, obviously. He doesn't have batteries. He just gets his power off the grid.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, the batteries are also have made incredible gains. Um, so this is this, okay, so the problem is that, okay, we can build a new house that's like net zero and that's very efficient. But, we have these like 100 million old buildings and houses out there, and retrofitting them is, hard to imagine how this can really be done, you know.
Yeah. Well, so this is really interesting that the New York City Council 2 weeks ago actually voted to because they came out with the same report that said, one third, two-thirds of all emissions from New York City are from these like pre-Civil War era buildings. And so the New York City Council just voted to mandate solar panels on the roofs of every single government building in the city. And so I guess I want to ask you, like, is it as simple as that? Like, is it as simple as just putting solar panels on the roofs of every
No,
single building? Why not?
no, not at all. No, not at all. In fact, well, the thing they have going here is, there's a lot of environmental things going on in New York, but we have a thing here now called Local Law 97, which is supposed to address energy use in buildings. And one part, I mean, there is also a goal to get more renewable energy here. But like in New York City, you know, many, like most buildings in New York City don't really have that much space on the roof that you could use
Yeah.
for solar. So, to the extent solar works well, if you have something like a warehouse where you have a big open flat roof, that's a good solar installation. People who have just a few panels or just a small roof is, much less sort of cost-effective way to do it. Um, and like I say, most buildings in New York, especially high rises, often really don't have a very big roof. But the local law 97 is addressing just the energy use of the buildings. If you go around New York now, like every building has this like letter score thing in the
Yeah.
window of the lobby, A, B, C, D, rate you from 0 to 100,
There's a whole lot of D's.
a lot of D. Well, D, I think the bottom, it's possible that from like below a rating of 70 out of 100 down is a D, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I know my apartment building's a D because it's a pre World War One. It's like a Civil War era old stone building, like most, So I guess I had two things I want to ask you. I want to talk about, what people like you are doing to about thinking about like how to retrofit those old buildings. But something I wanted to touch on just before we get to that is for those who are not aware, New York City's obviously used to be a big coal hub, but New York City had a huge transition to natural gas, and I'm pretty sure natural gas and nuclear are actually nuclear is probably a pretty small amount, but natural gas is the primary energy uh, source for New York City as far as I'm aware, and natural gas has been whether it's primary, it's up there. And
Yeah.
the nation as a whole, many states have really moved towards natural gas. I know, a lot of people talk about this. Um, can you explain like what's the difference between gas and natural gas? People say natural gas is cleaner and better for the environment. Is that accurate?
Well, I mean, pretty much. So I'll give you a little bit the history of this. So like I actually was on another podcast about this, and this was rather funny, which is that when they like see in the beginning, like New York City and most of these cities just heated with wood, you know, like firewood. And when they got to a point where they had pretty much denuded all the forests within like 100 miles of New York City, where literally, there were people who were like cutting down forests to bring wagon loads of, firewood into the city. And then they started marketing coal. I mean, they
Yeah.
literally, that was considered one of the pitches for it was that it was environmentally superior to wood. And, This was like over 100 years ago. So they were pitching coal. I mean, and just also on the basis of that, I think their concern was just that there wasn't enough wood, or they were cutting down all the forests. So they went to coal. And then, um, and I remember when I was a kid in New York City, there was, mostly coal heat, I guess. And there was like soot everywhere. I mean, like we would find, ash and cinder, if you had like a high shelf even inside your apartment, after a while it would get like sooty. And you go around and the outside of all the buildings have these like black streaks on them. I mean, that's all from the coal. Or like the Dakota apartment building
Yeah.
used to be completely black, like black as night, from coal ash. Um, so they pretty much phased that out. And the last big user of it was the New York school system. So they had an Environmental Bond Act in like around 1990 that got the money to convert all the schools to, I guess, probably oil or gas. So then, like my building here just converted from number 4 oil to number 2 oil, which is cleaner. So a while ago they banned number 6 oil as like really, really bad oil. And then like my building did the minimal thing they could do, which is go from number 6 oil to number 4 oil. Now they banned number 4 oil, so now it's down to number 2 oil, which is a bit cleaner. They were pushing gas for a while, and then what they've really concluded now, and which is true, which is that gas is better than coal or oil. I mean, gas in general has less CO2 emissions than, say, oil, but it still has a lot of CO2 emissions. So actually now they've banned new hookups for gas.
Yeah.
So in the New York metro area now, you basically cannot build new buildings with gas heat or even gas for like cooking. Um, and so the way gas mainly works is that what they call natural gas, is from underground, you know, like when they drill for oil, or they drill for oil and gas combined, because the same geological deposits that have oil tend to have gas. Um, so, so when they drill these wells, then they have to hook it up to gas pipelines, basically. So there's two ways gas is distributed, mainly through pipelines, or they liquefy it, and you have liquefied natural gas, which is what they
Mhm.
ship around the world on these giant ships. Um, and as opposed to propane, which is what you get in like a tank.
Right.
So natural gas contains propane, methane, and butane, and a few other. It's a mix of different gases. So some natural gas is better than other natural gas. I mean, in terms of the amount of energy in there, or a better mix of gases, or how dirty it is, or
Right.
how much it pollutes. And most of America gets their heat from natural gas, but in the Northeast, it's probably mostly oil
Okay.
because we don't have
Yeah.
the pipelines don't totally come this far up.
Okay. So, how do you feel about nuclear power?
Well, you know, nuclear power is very interesting because, like, I'm on the board of a nonprofit that helped shut down Indian Point up here, which was New York City's biggest nuclear supplier of power. So that's been completely shut down, mainly for safety reasons and environmental impact. And, you know, Indian Point was one of the earlier US power plants. So it was built around 1970. So,
Okay.
it's 50 years old. It was designed with like a 50-year useful lifespan. And basically all your nuclear plants in the US are kind of heading into this end of their useful life zone now.
Yeah.
They're now talking about Microsoft
Yeah,
has a
Microsoft and
plan.
Google.
well, Microsoft in particular wants to restart 3 Mile Island, which when you were probably not yet born was America's like first big nuclear incident, and was this scary thing. It like melted down. But they had like 4 units, so one unit melted down. They shut the whole thing down. Now Microsoft is like, see, like AI is
Yeah,
a massive demand of computing resources at like data centers. So the amount of power they need for this is enormous, and they want clean power, Good, thankfully, they're all very interested in clean power. Um, and so the thing now is, so in general, like I used to be categorically against nuclear power, mainly on the basis of waste and emissions. Um, like that we have no way to deal with the nuclear waste at
right.
all. Um, but it is good that it doesn't cause, carbon emissions. Um, it's not really like building new, nuclear plants is not really a good solution for climate change because, first of all, they're hugely expensive and typically take, like 15 or 20 years to build.
Hmm.
And we don't have 15 or 20 years. Like we're so deep in trouble with climate change. It literally, we do not have like 15 or 20 years to build new nuclear plants. As far as if you have ones that can be maintained or retrofitted safely, I would support that for sure. The other one they have now is what they call small modular reactors,
Yeah,
which is kind of like this idea like, we don't need to have, a multi-billion giant central, power plant to have nuclear. Small modular is like the idea that it's like a small modular plant would maybe you could bring it in on like 3 tractor trailer loads and set the thing up using like third or fourth generation nuclear technology. And that might be enough to power like a data center or a town or something.
yeah,
And they have them in China and Russia. We really don't have them in the West. They're kind of a theoretical thing. They also think, we could build these pretty quickly, and they'd be of a different design that theoretically at least couldn't blow up like Fukushima or 3 Mile Island or um,
Chernobyl.
Chernobyl.
Yeah. Um, I actually just watched the I just watched the Chernobyl like HBO miniseries. It was pretty intense. So I sort of know a little bit about that right now. But okay, so you're talking about we're talking a lot about the things that are bad. And,
Mhm.
I am curious, I want to give you a hypothetical here. You become dictator, Timon, of America. Woof.
Yeah.
It's concerning how you get there, but you're there.
Okay.
What are your actions? I mean, you
For
know,
climate change
yeah,
and
what are your actions for
sustainability.
climate change? I mean, what and I think that,
All right.
I think you understand, living in New York, like so many of these buildings are genuinely so old you can't retrofit them all
Yeah.
within a day. So what do you think are the steps that need to be taken?
Well, okay. I have an idea. I kind of have a pet idea for a project. Maybe you can
Yeah.
help me launch this.
All right, let's do it.
This is not a full answer to your question, but I'll try to give you a few answers. But so I have this thing I call ban the burn. And what bothers me is that people are burning fossil fuels all over the place that is a complete waste. And like an example was I went to a hotel recently, beautiful kind of resort hotel and a resort destination. And they have the driveway and the turnaround, and they have the big monument sign, and flanking on either side of the sign, they have like 3 big gas lanterns,
Yeah.
you know, and they're burning and lighting up the driveway area 24/7. And it's like you're just pumping out hydrocarbons just for decorative purposes here. Like you're wasting money and vital resources to do nothing but create pollution. So day one, I would ban anything like that.
Yeah.
You know, I would just ban that. I mean, friggin' get a hologram or a decorative light bulb or something in there, or at least turn the shit off during the day, like,
Right. Yeah.
you know, maybe you could just do it, from like, 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. if you have to do it. But like, just this kills me. And the one down the street here, Jake always makes fun of me, is the Dakota has this, you know.
Right.
And I'm
For
just
those who don't know,
just
the
like
Dakota.
all over the place. Just cut that stuff out. But what I would do, yeah, I think and I think similarly, just really, I think we need to declare a climate crisis
Yeah.
and immediately find every way to reduce unnecessary and wasteful emitting of carbon fuels. And, I think a lot of what, I think a lot of things going on are good, like the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, has massive, so I think they need to be even more. We can we have the technology to, like heat and cool all these buildings for much, much less energy. And I think the government should, well, see I guess what I would say, see, I think we need to launch a massive, how, publicly coordinated and subsidized like housing development process because for one thing, all these people in these low-lying areas that are subject to flood and storm all need to move to higher ground. And retrofitting all these old buildings and everything is just very expensive and time consuming, almost impossible while people are living there. And we have a massive housing crisis anyway. So, and nothing could stimulate the economy more. I mean,
Yeah.
and we need to, we also need to do it with more like prefabricated construction and everything. I mean, we can't really, or they have, they can now like build buildings using 3D printing technology
Yeah.
and things. So, we need to have, innovative new technologies to deal with these things. But, um, and, and I think, but I think if I'm dictator, I would do a lot of, I would push for a lot of sustainable policies, not only for energy, but, the pollution, um, the toxics that we're generating that are permeate everyone's bodies, all the food and everything
The
are all
microplastics.
microplastics, you know. Um, I don't know what I would do. I'd
All
hire
right. Well,
you
I
and
guess
your
it's a,
friends to
it's,
help
I guess
me.
it's a good thing. I guess it's a good thing I'm not making you dictator right now. But you have time.
Okay.
You have time to figure out what you would do as dictator. Um, so I guess where, you were talking about the election and all that kind of stuff, like I don't know, where do you see things standing right now? There's the Inflation Reduction Act, there's the infrastructure bill, Biden signs these bills, which are technically, the most profound climate legislation the US has ever done. But, many people like yourself would say, it's not enough or, not fast enough.
We
Interestingly,
need more.
yeah, you need more. Interestingly, countries like China, for example, is the fastest growing clean energy country in the world. I mean, they're switching over to solar at record pace, way faster than the US is.
Well, there's kind of a trade war, technology war in like solar panels now. And China, has much more of an industrial policy than we do. So they're the leader in battery technology, making solar cells, also at, electrifying transportation
Yeah.
and implementing solar power. They're also growing coal and other, hydrocarbon. They bought up most of the coal in Australia They bought up whole ports to export the coal to China. I mean, they're a big country with a lot of people. So, and you know, they're um, you know, like whatever we do to cut down on hydrocarbon emissions, we can't stop climate change without, every other country doing it as well. And especially including China, because I think they're emitting more than we are now. And, you have these third world countries are like, look, we never, we didn't industrialize when you did. And, we need to be able to, you know, pollute while we, industrialize too. And we're like, no, just because we did, you can't do it,
Yeah. And they're facing
And
the brunt of the climate crisis because these are
some of
typically,
them are.
a lot of them, island nations, coastal, Indonesia.
I
Yeah,
knew a guy
it's
in high school from the Maldive Islands. The average elevation in the Maldive Islands is like 2.5 feet, you know.
yeah. Yeah, well, I've been seeing all these especially after all the hurricanes, I think a lot more attention is being paid to the sort of central southern United States. And I've been seeing all these like projections of like, United States land mass to 2050, 2060, and like Louisiana, Florida, like significant portions of the country will be underwater.
Oh yeah. I mean, or they're already, um, I mean, in Florida, like in the Miami area, there are whole towns that are typically people who drive to their home through, 6 inch deep water at high tide, all the
Yeah,
time because it's gotten that, bad. Um, and then, when you have hurricanes or storm surge, that's the thing about global warming. I just want to go back to that a little bit, which is, it's they really a lot of environmentalists want to say climate change because warming sounds kind of warm and fuzzy, like,
yeah,
oh, it'll be a little warmer. I guess the winter won't be as bad, and it's way more about like, you know, intensity of storms and whether you're going to have heat, droughts, but also colder winters, just everyone's kind of like they just came out with I don't know if you've ever seen the climate zone maps
yeah. I don't know
that
about this.
um they literally like have maps that divide the country up into climate zones. Climate zones are used for one thing, they're like what plants will grow there, you
Hmm.
know, and like how much heating or cooling you should have, for buildings and things like that. And they just updated the maps. Basically, all the maps moved one climate zone north. So, you know,
Yeah,
so like, so like New York will have one zone hotter summers, one zone less cold winters, but it also screws up all the plants and animals. So you have like invasive species, and when you change the climate a little bit, the normal plants that would dominate in their environmental niche no longer make it there, and they're being outcompeted by some kind of invasive species that was maybe from the south, or all your animals, their range of where whichever ones are left, moved, like Long Island Sound used to be full of lobsters. Now there's
right.
basically no lobsters there. The water's just warmed up a little bit more, and it was already at the southern end of the range for lobsters. Now you have no lobsters there. Um, and another thing I want to also mention is there's actually a thing called environmental relativism, which is that people basically index like environmental change from when you were a kid, you know? So people in my generation were like, oh yeah, when I was a kid, there were a lot more birds and
Yeah,
insects, But if you actually look at written reports from people from the previous generation, they had the same thing and going all the way back. And I mean, when, like a number of generations ago, or a couple hundred years ago, I mean, there literally was so much more wildlife and animals and birds and bees and everything. I mean, like on Long Island, they used to hunt whales off the beach.
Yeah.
We wiped out like 97% of the whales, or certain species. And, like cod was the dominant fishing fish. Like Cape Cod was named after cod because they all were out and fish cod. Cod are completely gone. I mean, it's like it's people aren't, it's been so insidiously slow and continuous a process of environmental degradation, and people have no, we don't have a correct benchmark. No one is benchmarking it more than from when they were a kid. But this has been going on for hundreds of years, thousands of years. You know, like in biblical times, they said the Mediterranean had 1 million whales. There's like
Hmm.
zero whales now. I mean, it's just, if people, I think people really have no idea. Like I've read a bunch of environmental history books, and it's just people are mostly oblivious to like what we're doing to our own planet. It's literally like that other meme of, the three frogs in the pot that's being heated up. And one goes like, "We have to get out of here." The other ones are like, "Ah, you're an alarmist."
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that's tough about it is, it's easy to say that like, people have to be more alarmed, but the sort of shadow conspiracy theory thing we were talking about earlier is, there are billions of dollars every year flowing into media and flowing into the government to keep people from being alarmed about this, simply for the
Oh
purpose of
yeah.
economic growth. Chevron, Exxon. I mean, in New York, there's the super famous Chevron case against that. I don't know his name, but the lawyer who's been under house arrest for the past like 4 years because he like tried to take Chevron on. Super
I
super interesting. I'll send it to you afterwards. Um,
I don't know that one.
yeah, it's super. It's very fascinating. I will send it to you. I guess we're nearing the end here. I guess I want to challenge. I have a challenging question, but I don't know. Do you have any good news, or is there anything that you're excited about? Anything that you
Oh, in
know,
the environmental space,
yeah,
you mean?
environmental green building. I mean,
Well, I think
anything.
they're, like I say, I think that, I think they're, I mean, overall, it's very concerning, but, I think that there's hope because I think we have figured out that we have the technology, or we can develop the technology to solve this problem. There's really no shortage of energy. I mean, like the solar energy potential is enormous,
Yeah,
and there's more than enough energy, and we can solve these problems, and we can do it and we don't have to be like, cold at home in the dark to like get through this. We can, we can have better quality. This is like the passive house things. The people I've never lived in one, but people who live in these passive houses, they're like, this is like the most wonderful house we've ever been in. It's like so comfortable, more comfortable than ever, and you're using like nearly zero energy for that. So it's very doable. Um, and I think a lot of these other, I think, the challenge is like the political will, but the technology is there because it's achievable. And when you take some of these advanced technologies like AI, genetic engineering technology, and just the incredibly advanced material science and things, you know, um, offer the hope that, this is a problem we can solve. We need like the political will. And I don't know how you deal with, Mohammed bin Salman and, hundreds of billions of dollars. And, people need to wake up. That's what, people need to learn to see through the disinformation and, you know, um, just, you know, grasp the realities and deal with it. And see, actually, there's, um, actually, the one of the most interesting ones I heard was, you ever heard of this guy? There's this guy, John Doerr, Doerr. He's one of the
No,
top
I'm not
venture
sure.
capitalists from Kleiner Perkins. And he came out with, I think, the best overall plan to achieve sustainability. And the bottom line he wrote, he said, this is the biggest business opportunity of history is to implement all
Yeah.
the sustainable technologies. So, you know, I think a lot of young people get it. There's a huge boom in people with like environmental science majors and, you know, people. There's nothing I love more than young people who come out as like environmentalists.
There's more and more, and you just touched on, I think, what is gonna probably end up being the like, perhaps depressing but true hook of the episode here is that like, for a long time, the technology wasn't there, and so the modus operandi was, we have to do this morally, and that didn't work. But now there is a true economic reason to solve the climate crisis. First off, just the trillions of dollars in damages that it causes every year. But also, you like what you're saying, like this is an untapped industry. I mean, from a venture capital perspective, if that's how we have to think about this, which I think it is how we have to think about this, solar, wind, nuclear. I mean, we talk about nuclear fission, fusion. I mean, these are all new sources of energy, completely untapped. This is the new frontier, so to say. And I think, it's going to take, like you said, a really large overarching plan, perhaps a Green New Deal, to get that done, and the political
Well,
will.
I'll give you one kind of closing one like that. I
Yeah.
just read a really interesting editorial about this, about electric cars. And they were like, you know, like we've really turned the corner on this now. And they're like, the reason they're confident that electric cars will now take over is that they're better.
Yeah.
They're like, there's all this people against them, people, they argue, and there's a lot of disinformation. And they're like, anybody who drives one likes it better, you know? And they're like, one of the main things that people are like, especially the critics, they're all like, oh my God, there aren't enough charging stations or anything. They're like, very few people who have electric cars use charging stations
Yeah.
because they do it at home. And that's one of the best things. Is like you do it at home, but they're way less maintenance. They're
They're faster.
faster,
They're
easier, funner to drive. And it's not annoying that there's no tailpipe. Like, I mean, so and they're like, it's going to turn the corner. Like, there aren't that high a percentage of them now, but they're like, you know, the more common they become, the more ridiculous and expensive, like trying to find gas for your car is going to be.
No,
It's like,
absolutely. Electric cars accounted for 18% of all cars sold in 2023, up from 14% in 2022, and up from 2% in 2018. Um,
it's taking off. Yeah.
so it's taking
But we
off.
have a
Yeah,
long
and
way to go to have the fleet of cars be all electric.
it's a long way, but it's happening. I mean, I know a lot of people in the car industry are saying, even if a Republican, climate denier is elected, like the industry has moved towards electric. Like it's sort of a thing that is happening no matter what. Because you're right. At the end of the day, people who drive, like no one drives an electric car and is like, man, I really miss my gas car. Like it's just simply a more pleasant. It's just nicer.
Well, the car companies like it because they're cheaper to make.
Yeah,
There's many. I mean, you got no exhaust system, no fuel system, like no cooling system, no ignition system, they're easier to make. Um,
significantly
Many
easier.
fewer moving parts.
And that's another, I mean, talking about, industrial races. This is another thing where, people talk a lot about China. Like China is by far the highest percentage of electric vehicles because, with like companies like NIO and there's some other ones, but that's a whole thing.
Well, they have this one now, BYH
Yes, BYD, I think, right?
or BYD
Yeah, I think
that
it's
are going to
Yeah,
be
BYD.
BYD, and they're supposedly be bringing them into the well, I mean, actually, Biden. I'm not sure where Kamala Harris is on this. Biden was going to have like tariffs against import electric cars. Trump would have massive tariffs. So,
Well, yeah,
they're worried about, they don't want to let the Chinese steal, technological dominance in these industries. So, you know, um, they have much more of like industrial protectionist policies to try to, reinforce or build up American, engagement in these industries.
yeah,
Um, but they're like these China, I mean, they're like BYD has, you know, comparable cars to like Tesla for like half the price. So,
yeah,
when the prices come down like that, um, I think they said in 2 years, electric cars will be cost competitive with gas cars with no subsidy.
yeah. And they're all, I mean, and that's not even considering, the cost of maintenance, A, of gas vehicles, and B, the cost of gas. Like the cost, like, I mean, gas
Oh yeah.
prices are significantly higher than electricity prices. It's always been that way.
That's like my friend, like I was saying, he has his solar panels, his electric car. He spends zero on fuel, you
Yeah,
know.
it's
Uh,
super doable. Um, well, amazing. This has been a super, super duper fun conversation. I mean, I feel like I could go for another hour, but we're already sitting at a full hour of of talking about climate change and green building. I guess I just want to finish off with like, what are what are you up to right now on this? Like what is in, as a proclaimed environmentalist, what are you working on right now?
well, I'm working on a redevelopment of an old International House of Pancakes that would become like a green building. And I think I'm going to send you a pair of green socks so you can
Perfect.
demonstrate your commitment to the environment
I would love that.
visibly for everyone who knows you.
Good. I'll send you my address here in the Netherlands. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on, and this was an awesome episode.
Pleasure. It was fun to do, and I'm happy to do it.